Hello, Sophia here. This tutorial will show you how to paint a very simple watercolored mermaid. Also remember that this tutorial is speeded up double time, so feel free to pause it and rewind and take your time with it. The supplies you will need is your watercolor paper, so it's nice and thick and will hold the water. I'm going to be using gouache, which is really similar to watercolors. If you don't have gouache, don't worry about it. You'll need your paintbrushes, of course, a jar of water, and some paper towels. And then you'll also need your palette if you're using tubes. If you're not using tubes, you can just use your watercolor palette, and a pencil and eraser. So I started with this little curvy line for the rock that she will be sitting on. And then I started with her tail. So I'm starting with the back side and then kind of loop it around and curve it back down around. Her knees are like bent back a little bit. And just kind of clean up your lines as you go. And I added a really big wavy tail on her. Next, I moved on to her hair and her head. So she's just got this long, luscious locks, like really kind of fluffy long hair that covers up the extent of her back. And I just kind of did some like wavy lines throughout it. And I added this little starfish hair barrette. So just a little mini star at the top of her head there. And this is her arm coming down that she's resting on. So it just comes down at a little bit of an angle out from the bottom of her hair. And her hand is just flat against the rock. And now you can start painting. If you want to outline it first with a micron or a fine tip Sharpie or any outliner pen, and then erase your pencil marks and then paint, you are welcome to do that. But I just went ahead and painted it right over the pencil, which is why I'm erasing some darker parts and kind of lightening up my lines so that the paint will cover up those pencil marks and the pencil won't shine through. So yeah, I'm just erasing them a little bit so that they're fainter, but so that I can still see the outline. So I started with her hair, and I started with lemon yellow and yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is this kind of tannish color. And I just mixed a little bit of the two together to get a more natural blonde color. And I used a very fine tip brush, this really small baby brush. And I'm just kind of filling it in with light strokes and like wavy lines. And I started with a lighter shade of yellow, and now I'm moving on to a slightly darker shade, more of the yellow ochre, and just doing some like more bold lines, some wavy lines through it, give it the texture of hair. Next, I mixed a skin tone for her arm. So skin tones can be a really difficult color to mix. I started with a little bit of red, a little bit of white, and I still have that yellow ochre on my palette. So I'm going to add just the tiniest little dot of red into my yellow, and then quite a bit of white. And that should get a nice peachy tone. You might already have this color on your palette, if so, that's great. And just still using that really fine tip brush, I filled in her arm and that little bit of face that's poking out. And I realized she kind of needed an arm on the other side too, so I just really lightly sketched in the other arm as well. And still using the really fine tip brush, I just used that red that was on my palette already, added a little bit of white to make it kind of pinky, and filled in the starfish hair barrette. And I wanted a little bit of like pink tones to her hair, so I mixed in a tiny dot of red and with some white to make pink, and just kind of adding some little pink lines and tints to her hair. And now we can start in on her tail. So I used greens and blues. So I just got out a little dot of dark green and dark blue. So I wanted to start with a lighter green, so I mixed some of the green in with my leftover yellow to make a lighter shade of kind of like lime green. And I just started by outlining the tail so I could see it a little bit better. And with my darker blue, I mixed it with some of the green to give it kind of a more turquoise look. And I went over the areas that would be in shadow. So that's like right underneath her hair and on her bottom side. And then just like right along the edges. And I just did kind of some polka dots to give it like that fish scale texture. Added some wavy lines all through the tail. Then I wanted a little bit of a lighter shade of blue, so I mixed in some white with blue and green for a lighter turquoise, and just gently filled in the rest of the white areas. Then I added some highlight. So I started with a lot of yellow, then a tiny bit of green, and added some white to get this really light shade of kind of lime green. And just kind of filled in some little highlight areas along the top of her legs or tail. Part of the fun with watercolor and gouache is really building up your layers. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just starting with a bunch of different colors and I keep adding on different layers and textures. So I actually just got a little bit of black on my palette. And first I dabbed up some excess water with a clean dry brush. Then I'm mixing a little bit of blue and black together to get a much darker shade of blue. And just went in again with my really fine detail brush and added some little like dots for more scale texture. And just keep layering and adding more detail until you feel like you're done. So for the background, I decided she would just be sitting on a big rock. So I mixed black and blue together again and just carefully went around all of her details. Kind of messed up and overlapped her hand a little bit. So there's a really cool trick with watercolor. If you get a clean, dry brush, you can kind of dab up excess paint. So I just went over it with a clean brush and picked up that color and then went over it again with my skin tone. And yeah, I can kind of erase it. So again, I'm just carefully going around everything. And I'm just gonna have the rock kind of fade out at the bottom. And I went around her tail with dark black, just pure black, to kind of give it some extra contrast and have her tail pop out more. And then I cleaned off my brush and I faded out the edges. So this is a cool technique again with watercolor and gouache that you can kind of just fade it out. And you're done. Of course, you can keep adding more detail if you want. You can add more background like a sky or some fish or whatever you want. This is just a good starting point. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Like and subscribe for more videos. See you next time.